4 minutes. That was the whole window. A night shift nurse had to drag a Navy SEAL back across a line most surgeons only ever watch a body cross. When his heart finally caught the rhythm again, the men in that room did not reach for gratitude. They reached for their badges, sealed every door in the building, and asked her a single question in a voice that had stopped pretending to be kind. Where does a trauma nurse learn to open a man's chest like that? At 3:47 in the morning, the Level 1 trauma floor at North Shore Regional Medical Center sounded like a machine trying to stay warm. The heating vents ticked. A saline pump clicked somewhere down the corridor. Outside, the ice storm coming off Lake Superior threw sleet against the windows in long, hissing sheets, and every few minutes, the foghorn out on the harbor gave a low moan that traveled up through the concrete and into the soles of your shoes. Sloane Carter stood at the nurse station with a tablet balanced on her forearm, charting the vitals of a 16-year-old boy she had stabilized 90 minutes earlier. A thin ringing sat behind her left ear, the way it always did on the cold nights, pitched somewhere near a high E. She had learned a long time ago to file it, under the general noise of the building, and keep moving. On paper, Sloane was 34. She had transferred up to Duluth 18 months back from a small county hospital in Montana, and before that, a place in Michigan nobody could ever quite remember the name of. She was quiet. She was fast. She was the nurse the charge desk put on the worst arrivals because she did not freeze, and she did not talk unless it mattered. The other thing people said about her, when they said anything, was that she never flinched. Arteries opened. Families screamed in the hallway. A chest rose and fell, and then stopped rising, and Sloane Carter's pulse stayed exactly where it had been. Her co-workers took it for cold. It was easier than the truth. Bay 3 is holding at 92/60, Sloane said without looking up. The spleen is what it is. Vascular will want him in the morning, not tonight. Keep the fluids conservative, or you will chase a number that is lying to you. Maya Ellison scribbled it down like it was scripture. Maya was 6 weeks off orientation, 23 years old, with the kind of eager face that had not yet been sanded down by a bad shift. She followed Sloane the way a duckling follows the first warm thing it sees. How did you know he had a splenic bleed before the scan? Vance said. Contusion. Because a contusion does not make a kid that calm, Sloane said. Bodies get quiet when they are shutting down. Watch the ones who stop complaining. She tapped the tablet. The monitor tells you what already happened. The patient tells you what is about to. Dr. Aaron Vance came around the corner with a coffee in one hand and the expression of a man who had heard himself corrected. He was 39, sharp-jawed, good with scheduled surgery, and less good with the kind that walked in bleeding. The boy is fine, he said. You could have paged me before you called vascular. I did page you, Sloane said. Twice. Vance did not have an answer for that, so he did what men like Vance did, which was change the subject to remind everyone of the latter. When I want a second opinion from nursing, I will ask for one. He said nursing the way some people said the weather. Then he walked off toward the lounge, and Maya watched him go with her mouth slightly open, and Sloane went back to her charting, as if nothing had happened, because in her life, almost nothing that felt like an insult had ever actually been one. At 3:51, the radio on Denise Okafor's desk broke into static. It was not the clean tone of city dispatch. It was a rough frequency, edged and clipped, the kind Sloane had not heard in a very long time, and had hoped never to hear again. North Shore, this is inbound air. 2 minutes out. We have a John Doe penetrating thoracic trauma, high right chest entry below the clavicle. He is losing pressure fast, and the breath sounds are going on the right side. He is peri-arrest. We need your trauma team standing, and we need the massive transfusion protocol turning over before we hit the pad. Do you copy? Denise keyed the mic. Copy air. Trauma 1 is open. She looked up. That is not our medevac cadence. Who talks like that? Soldier, Sloane thought, and did not say it. She set the tablet down. She did not run. She walked into Trauma Bay 1 at a pace that looked almost slow, and inside that pace, her hands were already 3 steps ahead. Blue gloves. O negative on the rapid infuser. 2 large bore lines laid out. Chest tube tray to the right, where a right hand could find it without looking. Intubation kit open, and then without quite deciding to, she pulled the thoracotomy tray from the bottom shelf and set it on the counter behind her, out of Vance's sightline, because something in the shape of that radio call had told her that the standard tray was not going to be enough tonight. "Why are you pulling the chest tray twice?" Vance said, coming in fast. Coffee gone, sleeves already up. "Penetrating chest. We needle it. We tube it. We ship it to the OR. We do not open him on the floor." "We might," Sloan said. "We will not," Vance said. Overhead through the concrete, she heard it before the pad lights even came up. Not the light civilian whine she had spent 2 years teaching herself to expect. A heavier beat, 2 blades, and then 4 a rotor thump that came in low over the harbor and set the ringing in her left ear vibrating at exactly its own pitch, so that for 1/2 second, the sound outside and the sound inside her skull became the same sound, and she was not in Duluth at all. She was somewhere with no snow and no help coming. Then it passed the way it always passed, and she was a nurse in a warm room again. The doors at the end of the corridor slammed open. The gurney came in at a dead run, and the 2 men pushing it were not paramedics. They wore plate carriers under dark shells, sleeves soaked to the elbow, and they moved like the gurney was the only thing in the world. On the mattress was a man the size of a doorframe chest, bare, where they had cut his shirt away. Skin the gray of wet ash, a field dressing over the right upper chest, already black and shining through. His right arm had fallen off the rail and along the ribs on that side, half hidden under blood. Sloan saw the ink. A skeleton in a diving frog's shape. A bone frog. She knew exactly what that tattoo meant, and exactly what kind of man wore it. He took a round below the vest line, high right. The larger of the 2 men said, in a flat, sit-rep voice that did not belong in a hospital. "Through and through, angle down. Lung is filling. We lost his pulse for a stretch in the bird and got it back thin. His name does not matter. Keep him breathing." Vance froze for 1 full second at the sheer amount of blood, and in that 1 second, the monitor found the man's chest and screamed. "Pressure is 40 over nothing," the anesthesiologist called from the head of the bed. "Rate 170 and ragged. Trachea is shifting left. He is tensioning on the right. Needle decompression second space," Vance said, and got the needle in, and there was a hiss of air, but the pressure did not climb. It climbed for a breath and fell right back. "Chest tube now, 36 French." The tube went in, and blood came out in a thick rope, not a trickle of rope that filled the collection chamber past the first line, while everyone in the room watched it fill. "That is a massive hemothorax," Denise said quietly. "That is not stopping." Vance had his hands on the man's chest and nowhere to put them. He was a good surgeon in a room with lights and a scrub tech and a plan. This was none of those things. "We tube him and we run him to the OR," he said, but his voice had gone up half a register, and the number on the monitor was falling while he said it. "Get the elevator. Get vascular in from home. Somebody call the OR." "He does not have the elevator," Sloan said. Everyone looked at her. "He has a subclavian, or an axillary artery, torn under that clavicle," she said, already moving, "and it is emptying into his chest as fast as we can put blood in the top. He arrests on the way to the elevator. He arrests in the elevator. He dies in the hallway with a full unit of somebody else's blood in him." She looked at the monitor, then at the man's gray face, and something in her did the arithmetic she had spent 7 years pretending she had forgotten. 30 seconds until the rhythm broke for good. Maybe less. "Move," she said. It was not loud. It cut through the room the way a blade cuts clean and without effort, and Vance actually stepped back before he knew he had. "You are a nurse," he started. "I know what I am." She was already gloved to the elbow, already reaching past the standard tray for the one she had set behind her, the one he had told her not to pull. She pulled the scalpel. "Prep his left side. Betadine 1 pour. Do not scrub. We do not have it. Somebody keep bagging. You," she said to Maya, whose eyes were enormous, "hold his arm out of my way, and do not let go of it no matter what you see." "Jenkins, back away from that patient," Vance said, using the wrong name because in his panic, he had reached for the nearest one, and he put a hand out to take her shoulder. She did not look at him. She rolled her shoulder and stepped one small economical step, and his hand closed on air, and his weight carried him half a pace past the bed, and by the time he had caught himself, she was already standing in the primary position, with the scalpel low. What happened after that took 4 minutes, and the ceiling camera in trauma bay. One recorded every second of it, which would matter a great deal before the night was over. She opened the left chest between the 5th and 6th ribs in one long controlled line, following the curve under the muscle, and slid the rib spreader in and cranked it wide. She was not looking for the injury the way you look for a set of keys. She reached in with her right hand, along the inside of the chest wall, past the collapsed lung, and found the aorta, where it ran down against the spine, a thick, pulsing cord, slick under her fingers, and she pinched it flat against the vertebral column with a clamp, cutting the pressure to the torn vessel above and buying the brain the only thing it wanted, which was time. The rope of blood out of the chest tube slowed. The heart under her other hand had stopped doing anything useful. It was quivering a bag of worms, no rhythm left to speak of. So she cupped it. She put her hand around a dying man's heart and squeezed it in a slow, deliberate rhythm, once a second, driving what blood he had up toward a brain that did not yet know it had been abandoned, and with her clamped hand, she held the aorta shut, and she counted out loud, so the anesthesiologist would match the bag to her. "This is not in any civilian textbook," she said to no one to the room, in a voice with all the warmth drained out of it. "So don't try to remember it. Suction high, follow my hand." She found the torn artery under the clavicle where it had been chewed by the round, and she did the thing the men who had trained her called seating a bridge, a field expedient. The JSOC medics had a name for that she was not going to say in a room full of witnesses, and it was ugly, and it was fast, and it held. The bleeding at the top went from a rope to a weep. "Give the antifibrinolytic," she said. "Standard weight-based dose. You know it, do it now." 20 seconds. 40. The room had gone dead silent except for the wet rhythm of the bag and the count of her own voice. Then the monitor, which had been screaming one flat, continuous note, stumbled. Beep. A gap. Beep. Beep. "There is a rhythm," the anesthesiologist whispered. "There is a rhythm. Pressure is 60/40. 66. 70. He looked up at Sloane the way you look at something you cannot explain. "It is his. That is his heart. Not yours." She eased her hand off the muscle and let it beat on its own for 3 seconds, watching, and it held. She left the aortic clamp exactly where it was packed the chest with sterile dressings around her own forearm, and only then did she look up. "He needs the OR now. Vascular repairs the subclavian and takes my clamp off under lights, not before. He is stable enough to move, and not 1 minute longer than that." She looked at Vance, who had not said a word in 90 seconds. "He is yours upstairs. Don't lose him in the elevator." She stripped the bloody gloves off with 2 wet snaps, dropped them in the biohazard bin, and walked out. In the break room, she ran the water hot and watched it come off her hands pink and then clear. The ringing behind her left ear had not stopped. She looked at herself in the steel mirror over the sink, at a tired 34-year-old nurse in scrubs gone dark down the front, and what looked back at her was not tired at all. "You are getting sloppy," she told her reflection very quietly. She had gone in with her bare hand. She had counted out loud. She had let them see the whole thing. 7 years of being nobody, and she had spent it all in 4 minutes, because a man with a bone frog on his ribs had come through her doors. She reached for a paper towel. The overhead speaker chimed 3 short rising tones, a pattern that had nothing to do with any medical emergency. A calm, recorded voice followed it. "Attention. Code black. Code black. All exterior doors are now secured. Staff remain at your stations." Sloane went still with the paper towel in her hand. Code black was not a patient. Code black was the building itself closing like a fist. Through the frosted glass of the break room door, she watched shapes move down the corridor, and they were not police, and they were not hospital security. They came in a loose diamond, unhurried 4 of them, dark coats. Over what she could tell, even through the glass, were sidearms, and the lead one held up something small and gold to Denise at the charge desk that made Denise sit down very fast. They were not looking at the trauma bay. They were walking straight toward the break room where she stood with the water still running. They did not take her anywhere dramatic. They took her up to the 4th floor to the hospital boardroom, a long table of pale wood that usually hosted arguments about bed counts and now hosted nothing but a manila folder, a steel thermos, and a tablet turned face down. Sloane sat at one end in a fresh set of oversized scrubs, hands folded on the table back to the wall. By habit, both exits mapped before she had finished sitting. Outside the window, Duluth was a smear of orange lights under falling sleet. Somewhere below, an ambulance she would never see was carrying a man with her clamp still inside him toward an operating room. The man who came in did not move like the others. The others had moved like security. He moved like someone who had spent years learning to carry a heavy pack without letting it show. He was maybe 45, close-cropped gray at the temples, a charcoal coat he did not take off. He set a coffee down, pulled out the chair across from her, and sat before he spoke, which most men in his line of work did not do. "My name is Cole Bennett," he said. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. You are Sloane Carter. Employee number night float trauma, 18 months in this building." "Is he going to live?" Sloane asked. Her voice had the soft, careful warmth of a civilian nurse who has had a long night. "The man from the helicopter. Chief Elias Vaughn is in your operating room right now," Bennett said. "Your surgeon says he has a little better than an even chance, which the same surgeon tells me is impossible, because 40 minutes ago, Chief Vaughn was in his words, dead on the table." Bennett turned the thermos a quarter turn on the wood, an idle motion, and did not take his eyes off her. "He also says he does not fully understand what he watched a nurse do to keep that from being true. Dr. Vance did the work," Sloane said. "It was a bad wound and a good team. Sometimes you get lucky." "Lucky," Bennett repeated. He said it without any edge at all, which was worse than if he had sneered. He reached over and turned the tablet face up and slid it down the table to her. "Watch yourself get lucky." The footage was silent and gray shot from the ceiling of Trauma Bay 1. It showed the gurney come in. It showed Vance freeze. It showed the monitor in its little corner of the frame flatten. And then it showed her. "Stop me if I get any of this wrong," Bennett said, quietly, watching not the screen but her face. "You do not startle when the chest tube fills. You do not look for the bleed. You reach in, and you find the aorta against the spine. By feel first, pass. No light, no hesitation. You clamp it. You take the heart in your bare hand, and you pace it by hand, while you count, so the anesthesia matches you. Then you seat something under the clavicle I have seen exactly 1 time before in my life. in a place that was not a hospital. He paused the video with a fingertip on the frame where her hand was buried in Vaughn's chest to the wrist. And you know what I keep coming back to. You closed your eyes when you went in. Nobody who learned surgery in a school closes their eyes. People who close their eyes learn to do it in the dark, in the cold, with somebody screaming next to them, because that was the only condition they were ever allowed to learn it in. Sloane looked at the frozen image of her own hand. I read a lot of journals, she said. There are case reports. Battlefield Medicine gets published now. It does, Bennett agreed. The technique you used under that clavicle does not. I know that for a fact. He leaned back an inch. I was an Army medic, 11 years. 2 of them in places I still cannot name on a form. I have packed a junctional bleed with my knee on a man's neck in the back of a truck that was still moving. I know what battlefield surgery looks like when it is real, and I know what it looks like when somebody read about it. What I watched on that tape was not read about. He tapped the table once. And the specific thing you did to bridge that artery, that was not in the field manual when I carried it. It was not in anything I was ever cleared to see. It has a name, and it is 11 months old, and it belongs to a program at Fort Bragg that I am not read into. They call it the Sable Protocol. It was written for Tier 1 extraction medics who work behind a line with no surgeon coming and no OR to run to. It is not taught at a university in Montana. It is not taught to floor nurses. It is barely taught at all. The room was very quiet. The sleet ticked against the glass. Sloane let a small, tired smile touch her mouth, the nurse's smile, the one she had worn for 18 months. I'm a fast learner. Bennett went still, and she watched him catalog the smile and set it aside as false, because he had seen that particular smile on the faces of people in his own former profession. People who had been trained to hand you a pleasant expression the way a magician hands you a card. There it is, he said softly. That is the tell, not the surgery. That. He opened the manila folder. Let us talk about Sloane Carter for a minute since you like her so much. Born in Marquette, Michigan. Nursing degree, a small program in Montana, class of 2017. County hospital, then here. A quiet life. A boring life. A perfect life. He turned a page. So perfect that my cyber people picked it apart in the 40 minutes it took me to drive here from the field office. Your social security number was issued the same year as your degree, not the year you were born. The high school photo in the Marquette yearbook is a composite, a very good one. Somebody spent real money and real skill building Sloane Carter, and they built her. Recently, the charge nurse in Montana who signed your reference letters retired to Arizona 2 years ago and does not answer her phone because she died there quietly in her sleep at 51. He closed the folder and folded his hands on top of it, and for the first time, his voice lost the flat professional evenness and dropped into something more human and more dangerous. I do not think Sloane Carter is real, he said. I think somebody who is very good at staying dead built her to hide inside. And tonight, that somebody reached into a Navy SEAL's chest in front of a camera because she could not stand to watch him die. So I am going to ask you once plainly before the people above me get here and stop being polite. He leaned forward. Who are you? Sloane looked at him for a long moment. Somewhere below them, in a room she would never see, a machine was breathing for a man with a bone frog tattooed on his ribs, and she had put him there, and she found she did not regret it even now. You already know I am not her, she said. You have not asked the real question yet. Bennett reached into the back of the folder and drew out a single glossy photograph and laid it face down on the pale wood between them and left his hand flat on top of it. No, he said. I have not. But I am about to. He turned the photograph over. It was a satellite, still grainy the way those images always were shot, from high up and cleaned by a machine. It showed a valley floor between two brown ridges, a burned-out convoy, 3 vehicles blackened and thrown apart. In the center of the frame, a woman knelt over a man in the dirt, both hands buried in his chest, her body bent into the same shape Bennett had just paused on the tablet. She wore unmarked gear. Her face was turned up toward something off-frame, caught by the lens at high resolution streaked with dirt and blood, and it was the face of the nurse sitting across the table. The timestamp in the corner read 7 years ago. "That is a valley in the Hindu Kush," Bennett said. "Near a border I will not name. The intelligence community has a file on the woman in that photograph, and the file is closed because the woman in that photograph is dead. Killed in action 7 years ago along with her entire team in exactly the place you are looking at. The program that ran her gave her a code name because they never used the real one on paper." He watched her eyes. "They called her Revenant, and I would very much like to understand why a dead woman is standing on my satellite photo and sitting at this table with a Navy SEAL's blood under her nails." Sloan looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she closed her eyes exactly the way she had closed them going into Vaughn's chest, and let out a slow breath through her nose. And when she opened them, the last of the nurse was gone. The warmth had drained out of her posture. What sat across from Bennett now sat the way soldiers sit, weight forward, hands loose and ready, a person who had already counted the exits and knew which one she would use. "Because they were wrong," she said. Her voice had dropped and hardened and lost its music. "The file is closed because closing it was convenient for the people who opened it, and because I made sure there was enough of me left in that convoy to close it. Dental records burned slower than everything else. I gave them a mouth to bury. You faked your own death. I finished a job somebody else started," she said. "Somebody sold us. You want the real question, Bennett, here. It is. 7 years ago, my team went into that valley to pull out a source, a man who had spent 3 years feeding us the names of the people moving weapons across that border. It was a clean insertion. Right up until it was not." She turned the photograph a half-inch with one finger, aligning it an old habit. "There was no air cover when it went bad. Our comms were jammed on a frequency they should not have had. The ambush was not waiting where the terrain said an ambush should wait. It was waiting exactly where our own insertion plan said we would be at exactly the minute the plan said we would be there. You do not stumble into that. Somebody handed them the playbook, our loadout, our timing, our rotation. All of it." Bennett had gone very still because he had carried that fear, his whole career, the one every operator carries, that the thing that kills you will not come from the enemy, but from your own side. "Who?" he said. "A contractor," she said. "A private outfit that did wet work for whoever paid, dressed up as a logistics company, so the money looked clean. They bought our plan off a man inside a defense intelligence shop who needed to make a boat payment. 6 of my team died in that valley. I kept my commander alive in the bottom of a dry canal for 2 days with a tourniquet and a roll of tape, and my own 2 hands waiting for a helicopter that was never tasked to come. And he died on the 2nd night anyway, holding my wrist asking me if the bird was close." Her jaw moved once. "When I understood the bird was not coming, that we had been written off before we ever crossed the line, I stopped being their soldier. I walked out over the mountains into the next country, with my boots frozen to my feet, and I let them bury a dead woman, and I built somebody new. Somebody who saves people instead of losing them. Somebody who does not fight rich men's wars in valleys nobody can find. And the contractor," Bennett said slowly. "The company, you remember the name? I will never forget the name." She looked at him. "But you did not chase me up here to talk about 7 years ago. You have a SEAL in my OR who took an armor-piercing round below his vest tonight, in a city with no war in it. And you came in the door hard enough to lock the whole building down. So before I tell you anything else, You're going to tell me what Chief Vaughn was doing on the water tonight to get himself shot in Duluth, Minnesota." Bennett studied her for a long moment, weighing something, and then made the decision she had watched 100 careful men make the decision to trade a secret for a secret, because the clock was worth more than the caution. "He was running an interdiction," Bennett said. "Off-the-books joint tasking, no local coordination, which is why nobody in my field office knew until his team carried him through your doors. There was a handoff scheduled tonight on the harbor. A courier was moving a stolen drive out of the country on a lake freighter bound for Canadian water. Vaughn's team hit the handoff. The other side hit back harder than anybody planned for. Armor-piercing rounds suppressed weapons, men who moved like they had done it before. Professionals. They took Vaughn's team apart, put him on the ground, and pulled back into the container yard, with the drive still in the wind. "What is on the drive?" Sloan said. "That Bennett said is where it stops being a robbery and starts being a massacre." He turned the manila folder around and pushed it toward her. On the inside cover was a printed logo, a stylized blade, a company name underneath it. "The drive holds an active source network. Every human asset the community is running across an entire region. Every man and woman feeding us names, and everyone those people touch. If it reaches the buyer, we do not lose a secret. We lose people. Hundreds of them, one confirmed identity at a time over the next year." He tapped the logo. "The outfit that took it tonight, the professionals who shot your SEAL, they contract under a shell. This shell, Halberd Group." Sloan did not move. She looked at the blade on the folder, at the name printed under it, and something happened behind her eyes that Bennett would later describe to no one, because he did not have the words for watching a person's grief turn all the way around and become a purpose. "Halberd," she said very quietly. "You know it. I know their signature," she said. "I know how they seat an ambush and how they run an exfil and how they think because 7 years ago they killed my team in a valley in the Hindu Kush using a plan they bought from a traitor." She lifted her eyes to his. "It is the same company, Bennett. The men who took that drive tonight are the same men who left me to die in a canal. And you are about to lose them in a container yard because you are hunting them like a cop hunts a criminal, when what you need is somebody who was trained by the same people who trained them." She stood up from the chair. Bennett's hand drifted toward his coat. "Sit down, Miss Carter," he said. "You do not have time for me to sit down?" she said, and walked to the window and looked out past the sleet toward the black sprawl of the harbor, where a freighter was waiting to carry 300 names out into the dark. "You are going to lose them before dawn, unless you let me show you exactly where they are standing." Bennett did not sit her back down. He stood 2 slower and came to the window, and for a moment the two of them looked at the same harbor from opposite sides of everything. "Talk," he said. "Tell me why I should put a burned operative I met an hour ago in front of my people instead of arresting her and calling this in." "Because your people are already losing," Sloan said. She turned from the glass. "You have a perimeter around a container yard the size of 40 football fields in an ice storm at 4 in the morning. You have thermal drones that are being washed out by the heat coming off the taconite furnaces on the east side of the port. You have men freezing in position waiting for a target to show itself, and Halberd knows all of that, because Halberd built their whole business on knowing exactly what a perimeter can and cannot see. You will still be looking for them at first light. And at first light the freighter clears the breakwater, and the drive is in Canadian water, and gone." "Then tell me where they are," Bennett said, "since you know them so well. They are not in a container." She crossed to the table, turned Bennett's tablet toward her, and pulled up the port on the map, moving through it, with a speed that told him she had already built the whole picture in her head while he was still talking. "A container is a box you can be trapped in. Men like this never let themselves be boxed. They will have set a mobile command post somewhere with 3 things. A wall at their back, 1 clean route to the water, And a heat source big enough to drown their own signatures, so your drones read them as furnace bloom instead of bodies. Her finger came down on a cluster of long, low structures along the east edge of the yard, hard against the ore terminal. Here, the pellet loading gallery next to the furnaces. The steel runs hot all night. Your thermal cannot separate a man from the machinery. There is a service road to the dock on one side and open black water on the other. That is where they are sitting, running the drive off a battery uplink while they wait for the freighter to take on the last of its cargo. That is where I would be. That is where they are. Bennett looked at the map for a long time. Everything she had said fit the gaps in his own picture, the way a missing tool fits its outline in a drawer. "Say I believe you," he said. "Say I put you next to my team. What do you want, Revenant? Because nobody does this for free, and you least of all." She looked at him, and the answer was simple and total, and she had known it since the moment he laid the satellite photo on the table. "I want to die," she said. "Properly this time. I want the file on Revenant closed and salted and gone. I want Sloane Carter to stay exactly as boring as she looks. You get the drive. You get the men. You get the biggest interdiction of your career, and you can tell your bosses whatever story keeps the cameras off this hospital. And in exchange, when the sun comes up, there is no operative. There is a night nurse who was in the break room the whole time. That is the deal. All of it, or none of it." Bennett held her eyes. Below them, the building was still locked. A man was still on a table, and out in the dark, 300 names were counting down toward a freighter. "If this is a trap," he said, "if you walk my people into a kill zone, I will not read you your rights. I will put you down where you stand." "If it were a trap," she said, "you would not see it coming, and you would not survive being wrong. So let us both be grateful it is not." She was already pulling the fresh scrub top off over the t-shirt underneath. "I need cold weather gear that fits a plate carrier without a badge on it, and a medic bag stocked to my list, not yours. And I need you to understand something before we walk out that door." She looked at him, and for the first time there was something under the ice that was almost warm, almost human. I'm not going out there for your drive. I do not care about your careers or your quiet war. I am going out there because 7 years ago those men left me holding a dying man in a ditch, and tonight they put another one on my table, and I am done letting them decide who gets to bleed out in the dark." 25 minutes later, she was crouched behind the frozen wheel of a rail car at the edge of the ore terminal in borrowed black. A stocked bag strapped to her thigh, and the harbor was a wall of moving sleet, lit orange from below by the furnaces. Bennett knelt beside her, ice crusting the rim of his helmet, a scoped rifle across his knees. Behind them, spread through the container rows, a tactical team waited on his word. "Thermal is garbage," a voice said in Bennett's ear, and he repeated it low. "Just like she said. The furnaces are eating everything east of the waterline, because they are standing in the one place your machines are blind," Sloane murmured. She was not looking at the gallery. She was looking up at the long steel catwalks that ran above the loading chutes at a section where the sleet fell differently, broken by something stretched across the rail. There, above the third chute, they have a shooter in an Overwatch hide under netting. If your team breaches the gallery door, he kills the first 4 men through it before anybody sees the muzzle. You do not have a door problem, Bennett. You have a man in the sky you cannot see. Bennett lifted his scope, found the seam in the falling ice she was pointing at, and swore softly. "How do you know that is a hide and not tarp on a rail?" "Because it is exactly where I would put a man," she said, "and these are my kind of men." She pulled the tablet from his vest and brought up the terminal's power schematic, and her finger traced a line from the furnaces out to a transformer at the head of the pier. "You cannot breach that gallery without losing people, so we do not breach it. We make them come out." That battery, uplink they are running the drive off, needs steady power to keep the transfer alive. Kill the main feed to the ore terminal, and their backup takes the load. But for about 90 seconds, while it cuts over the drive is exposed. If the transfer corrupts everything, they killed your SEALs team for tonight is gone, and they know it. So they will not sit in the dark and let it die. They will grab the drive and break for the boat, and the second they leave that gallery, your machines can see them again, and so can you. Bennett looked at her. This dead woman with a live nurse's calluses laying out an assault the way other people laid out a grocery list. "You are sure?" he said. "No," she said. "But I know how they think, and this is the play. Hit the transformer now. That freighter is minutes from casting off." Bennett keyed his radio. "Marksman 1. Bennett said low into his collar. "Primary transformer head of the pier. On my mark, take the feed. Assault elements hold the perimeter. Nobody moves until they move first." He looked at Sloane once more, one last chance to call it off, and she gave him a small, flat nod. "Mark." A single crack rolled out across the ice, thin and quickly swallowed by the storm. Out at the head of the pier, a shower of hard blue sparks burst against the falling sleet, and then the whole east edge of the port went black. The furnaces still glowed deep orange from within, but the floodlights over the ore terminal, the strings of bulbs along the gallery, the work lights on the freighter's deck, all of it died at once, and the harbor dropped into a darkness broken only by the furnace mouths and the moving beams of the sleet. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then, men began to shout inside the pellet gallery close, and hard voices trained not to panic, but panicking anyway. At the edges, and flashlight beams cut frantic arcs across the loading chutes. "Movement!" The voice in Bennett's ear said sharp now. 3-4 bodies east door of the gallery breaking for the dock. One of them is carrying a hard case against his chest. "That is the drive," Sloane breathed. "They chose the boat over the transfer. Go!" "All elements move," Bennett said, and the container rose behind them came alive. The tactical team swept forward through the dark with a discipline that was almost silent until it was not. And then the night tore open. Muzzle flash strobed white against the falling sleet. The halberd men were good, better than criminals had any right to be, and they fought backward toward the water in a fighting withdrawal that gave ground for time one element covering while another moved. Rounds sparked off the steel chutes and cracked past overhead. Somewhere up on the catwalk, the hidden shooter she had warned him about opened up, and a burst walked across the top of a container 2 feet from a federal agent's head before Bennett's marksman found the muzzle flash and put the man in the sky permanently to sleep. Sloane stayed low and moved along the rail line flanking wide of the firefight, tracking one figure through the chaos, the one clutching the hard case against his chest, breaking away from his own team toward a maintenance jetty that ran out to the freighter's stern line. She had seen men make that exact choice before. The mission was not the fight. The mission was the case. Everything else was just noise buying at distance. An agent stepped out from behind a container to cut the courier off, and the courier fired without breaking stride. A short, controlled burst, and the agent went down hard on the ice, both hands flying up to his own throat. Blood came out between his fingers in a rhythm Sloane knew from across a distance of 30 feet, arterial timed to a heartbeat, the worst kind. She did not think. 7 years of a nurse's life fell away, and something older took the wheel. She broke from cover into open ground, while rounds were still in the air, crossed to the downed agent, and dropped, driving her knee down onto the side of his neck to pin the torn vessel against the spine, throwing her whole weight into it, the way she had once done in the bottom of a canal on the far side of the world. The bleeding slowed to a seep under her knee. "Stay with me," she said, tearing the bag open one-handed, packing the wound hard around her own knee with hemostatic gauze, wrapping it tight. "You are not dying in the snow. Not tonight. Hold this." She pressed his own hand down over the packing and looked up, and the courier with the case was already 40 yards gone, sprinting for the mouth of a covered conveyor tunnel that ran under the ore chutes straight out to the waterline where the freighter waited. Once he was in that tunnel, he was gone, and the drive with him. Bennett came around the container at a dead run, rifle up, and saw it too. "I do not have the shot," he shouted over the gunfire. "He is into the machinery." Sloane's head came up. Above the mouth of the conveyor tunnel, suspended on a gantry rail, hung the loading spreader, a massive steel frame the size of a car used to drop pellet loads into the ore. Cars held on a heavy chain by a manual quick release, painted safety yellow, its locking pin frozen shut with a season of ice. "The release!" she yelled and threw her arm up to point, hand still bloody. "Above the tunnel. Shoot the release, Bennett, the yellow pin now." He did not question it. He swung the rifle up, found the frozen pin over his sights, and put 2 rounds into it in the space of a breath. The pin shattered. The frozen chain screamed as it ran through the sheave, and 3 tons of steel spreader dropped straight down out of the dark and slammed into the concrete lip of the tunnel, mouth and arm's length in front of the sprinting courier. A deafening impact that folded the entrance in a spray of pulverized concrete and buckled steel. The blast of it threw the man violently backward off his feet. The hard case flew from his arms, skated across the ice on its shell, spun once, and came to rest against the toe of Bennett's boot. The tunnel was sealed. The way to the boat was gone. The firing sputtered and died in the rows behind them. With their courier down and their route buried, the surviving halberd men, professionals to the end, read the arithmetic and put their weapons on the ice and their hands on their heads, because a professional knows the difference between a fight and a grave. Bennett bent slowly and put one gloved hand flat on the hard case at his feet. Then he looked over at the woman kneeling in the bloody snow, with her knee still on a federal agent's neck, keeping a stranger breathing, while the world went quiet around her. The agent under her knee was pale, but he was breathing, and his pulse under her fingers was thin and steady, and there. Out past the breakwater, the freighter's engines throttled back down. It was not going anywhere tonight. Dawn came up gray and cold over Lake Superior, the storm blown out into a low iron sky, the water the color of an old blade. By the time the scene was secured, the sleet had stopped, and the world had that scrubbed silence a place gets after a hard night. The wounded agent was already in an ambulance, with a real pressure dressing over Sloane's field pack, alive, complaining, which was the best sound in medicine. 2 halberd men were in cuffs against a container. The one who had carried the case was breathing through a broken face and a set of restraints, and the hard drive that held 300 names was locked in a case in the back of Bennett's black SUV. Sloane stood at a frost-rimed spigot on the edge of the yard and turned the tap and let the water run over her hands pink, and then clear the way she had a few hours and a lifetime ago in a break room upstairs. The ringing behind her left ear had finally faded down to almost nothing, the way it did once the cold and the noise were done with her. Bennett walked up behind her and stood there a moment, watching the water go clear. "He is going to make it," he said. "The agent. Because of you." He paused. "Chief Vaughn came off the table 40 minutes ago. Your surgeon took your clamp out under the lights and repaired the artery, and Vaughn is going to walk out of that hospital in a month. Dr. Vance has been telling everyone who will listen that he has never seen anything like what happened in that trauma bay. And he is right. And he does not have the first idea how right." He turned something over in his hand. "He will spend the rest of his career thinking he witnessed a miracle. That is close enough to true." "And me," Sloane said, shutting off the tap. She did not turn around. Bennett held out his hand. On his palm was a small drive, black, unmarked. "The complete file," he said. "Everything the community and the Bureau hold on the operative called Revenant. Every photograph, every timestamp, the valley, all of it. He dropped it onto the frozen concrete between them and raised his boot and brought his heel down on it hard once and ground it into the ice until the plastic was in pieces. File corrupted in transit. Subject remains deceased. There is a night nurse who was in the break room the entire time, and I have 4 agents who will swear to it because they owe one of their own to that nurse, and they know how to keep their mouths shut. He looked at her. You are dead, Revenant. Stay that way. It suits you better than the other thing did. Sloane looked at the pieces of the drive on the ice, and something in her shoulders came down that had been up for 7 years. A small smile touched her mouth, and this time, it was not the nurse's smile, and it was not the operative's smile. It was just hers. Thank you, Bennett, she said. My shift replacement is probably wondering where the float nurse went, she added, pulling her damp hair back into a knot with hands that had opened a man's chest 6 hours ago. Denise hates it when the board is short at handoff. She was almost to the SUV that would run her back to the hospital when she saw Maya. The young nurse was standing at the edge of the secured lot in a hospital coat thrown over her scrubs, breath-fogging, having talked or begged or simply walked her way past a cordon nobody had thought to explain to her. Her eyes were huge. She had followed the ambulances down the way she followed Sloane everywhere, and she had seen enough. The black gear. The blood. The way the federal agent stepped aside for the night nurse from Trauma 1. For a long moment, the two of them just looked at each other in the cold gray light. They said, Maya started and stopped and tried again. Upstairs. They said Chief Vaughn coded twice, and you brought him back both times. They said you did something nobody at the hospital even has a name for. Her voice dropped. Who are you? Sloane thought about all the answers she had given tonight, the false ones and the true one, and she looked at this girl 6 weeks off orientation, who still believed the monitor told you what was happening, instead of what had already happened, and she gave her the only answer that was going to matter for the rest of Maya's career. I am the night nurse, she said. Same as you. I just did it longer in worse places. She stepped in, and her voice dropped to something quiet and level and kind. You are going to be very good at this, Maya. You already see the ones who go quiet. Most people never learn to. So here is the only thing I need you to carry out of tonight. Watch the patient, not the machine. And whatever you think you saw down here, the most useful thing a good nurse ever learns is which things are hers to keep and which are hers to forget. She held the girl's eyes. Tonight is one to forget. Can you do that for me? Maya looked at her for a long moment, this quiet, fast, unflinching woman she had wanted to become since her first shift, and something in her grew up a little right there in the cold. Watch the patient, not the machine, Maya said softly. I never saw anything. Sloane put a hand on her shoulder once and let it go. Go warm up. I will see you at handoff. And she got into the SUV and did not look back, because looking back was a habit she had trained out of herself a long time ago in a country with no snow in it. At 7 o'clock in fresh scrubs, Sloane Carter stood at the nurse station on the trauma floor and gave report to the day shift in a calm, tired, ordinary voice. Bay 3 stable vascular in the morning. Trauma 1 turned over and cleaned. Nothing else of note. The day nurse wrote it all down and never once looked up, and behind Sloane the monitors kept their patient watch, and outside the window the lake lay flat and gray and endless, keeping its own secrets the way she kept hers. They never gave her a medal. She would not have known what to do with one. Her name is Sloane Carter, and if you passed her in a hospital hallway, you would never look twice. And that is exactly the point. The people who carry the most are almost never the ones who let you see it. They stand in the worst 4 minutes of a stranger's life with their pulse steady and their hands sure, and then they wash the blood off and go give report and drive home in the gray morning like it was any other shift. The past does not get to decide who we become. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one who has already walked through the fire and chosen on the far side of it to spend the rest of her life pulling other people out. If Sloane's story got its hooks into you, if it kept you leaning toward the screen, do her the honor of share it with somebody who believes ordinary people can carry extraordinary weight, and subscribe for more stories about the quiet ones among us. And tell me down in the comments, if you had walked into that trauma bay and seen what Maya saw, would you have kept her secret too?